Born in Roswell, New Mexico, the town that would be the most famous UFO legend in American history 4 years later. His father broke the sound barrier for the U.S. Air Force and could never once say to his son that he loved him. A record label told him his songs weren't strong enough. 2 years later, one of them became Peter, Paul, and Mary's only #1 hit of their entire career. He wrote the most famous love song of the 1970s in about 10 minutes on a ski lift about a woman whose bed he would later cut in half with a chainsaw. He passed every test NASA threw at him to become the first civilian in space. He was, by his own account, a frontrunner. Then the president made a telephone call. 73 seconds after launch, that person who got that seat was dead. His sales topped 33 million records. He won exactly 1 Grammy in his whole life. He didn't live to hear his name called. They gave it to him when he was dead. The plane which killed him was bought 15 days before the crash. Built from a kit by a man he'd never met, with a fuel valve in a place the original designer never meant. His final words over the radio were calm, polite, technical. Now you get it? And then the signal dropped. Here's the story everyone gets wrong about John Denver. The dates are correct. The NTSB report is real. The chainsaw is really. The debate goes on whether one of the most beloved entertainers in American history died in an accident or a string of decisions any sober pilot would have avoided. This is the true story of Johnny Denver. Number 1, the boy who didn't fit anywhere, over his back. His birth name was Henry John Deutschendorf, Jr. He was born on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico. The irony begins right away. His father, Henry John Deutschendorf, Sr., was a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. As a major, Dutch would set 3 international speed records in the B-58 Hustler bomber, one of the fastest aircraft ever flown by the U.S. military. He was eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Air Force. Dutch could break the sound barrier. He could not say to his son that he loved him. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, John wrote that his father was a stern man who just couldn't show affection. Dutch was a hard drinker, was distant, quick to anger, and the family moved around all the time. By the time most kids had a best friend, John had been the new kid in 5 states and a foreign country. Once he tried to escape from home. He didn't get far. Later, he would admit to something simpler and sadder than running. He grew up feeling he should be somewhere else, but he never knew where that somewhere else was. He was only happy on his grandmother's farm in Corin, Oklahoma. There were animals, radio country music, stars you could actually see. And one day his other grandmother gave him a 1910 Gibson acoustic guitar. He was 11 years of age. That guitar was the first thing in his life that didn't move when his dad got new orders. The first thing he possessed. Number 2, the name the industry made him change it to. In 1961, the year his father was breaking world speed records in the B-58, John graduated from high school in Fort Worth, Texas, enrolled at Texas Tech, and chose architecture, the respectable profession, the kind of degree a record-breaking pilot's son was supposed to pursue. He was there for 2 years. He played in a fake band called the Alpine Trio. He played in local clubs. He did everything an architecture major was supposed to do, except for wanting to be one. John dropped out in 1963 and drove to Los Angeles with 1 guitar and almost no money. He gigged in folk clubs. He auditioned for bands. He was a zero. Then, in 1965, 2 things happened within months of each other that changed his life, each ugly in their own way. The first, Randy Sparks, founder of the New Christy Minstrels, told him point blank that Deutschendorf would not fit on a marquee. The name had to be dropped. So Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., his father's name was inscribed in Air Force record books, and the kid picked a new last name from the capital city of his favorite state, Colorado. He was John Denver. He erased his father's name from the front of his career. Second, Chad Mitchell, leader of the Chad Mitchell Trio, one of the biggest folk acts of the time, went out on his own. The 3 held auditions to find a replacement. He was selected from about 250 hopefuls, the John Denver Foundation said. 249 other singers were rejected that day. John took the seat. He became the lead voice of what was renamed the Mitchell Trio, and members of the group later claimed the Denver-fronted lineup outshone the original. Then John wrote a song. He called it Babe, I Hate to Go. He made copies for Christmas presents. His producer, Milt Oken, took the demo and gave it to another act he was producing, a folk trio called Peter, Paul, and Mary. They gave it a new name, They named it Leaving on a Jet Plane. It was Peter, Paul, and Mary's very first #1 single in their entire career in 1969. It would also be their final. The man who wrote it was about to be abandoned by his own crew. The Mitchell trio has broken up. John was 25, married to a hit songwriter on somebody else's record, and again, he was nobody. He signed to RCA. They released his first album. No one bought it. Then his second. Then his third. Bombed both. By 1971, the man who had taken Denver as a stage name was about to become a footnote, a guy who'd given away his biggest tune. And one night in Washington, D.C., he broke his thumb. Number 3, the 6 o'clock song that changed everything. In 1970, John was playing in Washington with 2 friends, a married couple, Bill Danoff and Taffy Never. They invited him back to their flat after their set. On the way, John had a small car accident. He hurt his thumb so bad he could barely play guitar. He had come to their apartment at about 3 a.m. Anyway, Bill and Taffy played him a song they'd been working on they wrote on a trip down Clopper Road in Maryland. Neither one had ever been in West Virginia. They were going to give the song to Johnny Cash. They played it to John. He cut them out. The 3 of them finished it together by 6 a.m. The next night, they played it at a club called the Cellar Door in Georgetown. The crowd called for a 5-minute standing ovation. John took Bill and Taffy to New York to record it with him. Released April 12, 1971. Take Me Home, Country Roads reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It went gold in 4 months. In 2014, West Virginia made it one of 4 official state anthems about a state none of the 3 writers had ever visited. It was also from the album Sunshine on My Shoulders. That song would be a number 1 by itself. In about 3 years' time, John Denver went from a broke folk singer to one of the top-selling recording artists on earth. Annie Tune. First of all, thank God I'm a country boy. 1. Calypso, written to his close friend Jacques Cousteau and his ship. Second, in 1974, he was appointed Poet Laureate of Colorado. He played the White House. He could sell out arenas. He appeared alongside George Burns in the 1977 film, Oh God. He has done TV specials with Frank Sinatra and Placido Domingo. He possessed everything, and he was on the verge of losing it all. 4. 10 minutes on a ski lift. By the early 1970s, Jay's marriage to Annie Martell was falling apart. They married in 1967 when John was still a nobody. Annie was from St. Peter, Minnesota. Quiet, down to earth, not built for the kind of fame that came to her husband at full volume after 1971. Swamped, insecure. They tried to have children, but could not. John was sterile. Eventually, they adopted 2 kids, Zachary in 1974 and a Kate in 1976. But first came separation, then adoption. In 1973, John's trip to Switzerland lasted 6 days. It seems like 3 months, said Annie. She'd wake up at 4 a.m. and cry until she fell asleep that night. Finally, she called him and told him that love is, in her words, unconditional. They returned together. In January 1973, John went skiing at Aspen. He rode the Ajax chairlift up Aspen Mountain, his thighs still ablaze from a run he later called just totally exhilarating. He looked out at the mountains and the time it takes a chairlift to run up Aspen Mountain, about 10 minutes. He composed in his head the whole tune and words of Annie's song. He skied down. He ran home again. He took up his guitar. He played it. It was a chart topper in 2 countries. It was a love song he gave her, Annie said, but she came to feel that it became something more like a prayer to him. It was not enough. By the late 70s, John was constantly on the road, but Annie wasn't. In his autobiography, he confessed to repeated infidelities. There were drugs in the 70s and the slow attrition of 2 people who'd married before either of them knew who they were. Annie filed for divorce in 1982. The divorce story you've probably heard is true. It happened. They were apportioning the estate when John drove home in a rage. He himself tells this story in his own autobiography. He picked up a chainsaw. He chopped off a corner of the kitchen table. He blicked at the dining room. He went into the bedroom and tore the headboard. He sawed their marriage bed in half. Annie has spoken of the darker times of the marriage. She told me that the guy who wrote Annie's song and the guy at the end of that marriage seemed like 2 different people to her. That is the part of John Denver that almost no one who hums country roads actually knows. His father, number 5. Finally, there is one beautiful part of John Denver's story, and it has nothing to do with a hit song. John started flying in the mid-1970s. It was the only thing his father had ever cared for, the only language Deutschlandorf could speak fluently. So Dutch, the Air Force Hall of Fame pilot who had lived a lifetime unable to tell his son he loved him, taught him to fly. And finally, in the cockpit of a small plane, the two had found a place where they could be father and son without the speed records and the silence interfering. When John died, he had accumulated well over 2,700 hours in the air. He was rated for single-engine, multi-engine, glider, and instrument flight, and had a type rating in his own Learjet. He had classic biplanes and acrobatic planes. His father died in 1982, the same year Annie filed for divorce. In the cruel mathematics of that one year, John lost the only two relationships in his life that had ever been his. What he kept was the flying. Number 6, the seat Reagan gave away to by the early 1980s, John was more than a singer. He served on the board of the National Space Society and helped design NASA's Citizens in Space program, which would eventually allow an average person to fly on the space shuttle. In 1985, he received NASA's Exceptional Public Service Medal. He'd built the program. Now he coveted the place. He wrote a 3-page letter to NASA volunteering himself. He was above all mental tests. He passed every physical exam. Denver himself said in 1986 that he thought he was the leading candidate to become the first civilian in space. Then President Ronald Reagan publicly declared that the first citizen in space would be a teacher. More than 11,000 people applied, and they chose a 37-year-old social studies teacher from Concord, New Hampshire. Krista McAuliffe was her name. Cape Canaveral, January 28, 1986. The space shuttle Challenger was sent into space, and 73 seconds after that, it broke up over the Atlantic. 7 crew members lost their lives. John Denver had been the leading candidate for that seat. He wrote and recorded a song called Flying for Me in tribute to all the astronauts. He gave a benefit concert that raised $50,000 for the families of the Challenger crew. But here's the part of the story that almost no one knows. He never gave up trying. He traveled to the Soviet Union and made arrangements with the Russians to catch a ride to the Mir space station. By some later accounts, they gave him a price in the neighborhood of $10 million for a 7-day mission. He'd have to learn Russian and train near Moscow for a year. He was willing to do it. The deal fell through for reasons still unknown. The man who survived the Challenger by being passed over kept trying to find another way up into the sky. In one of those attempts, he would die. Violation of order revocation number 7. He flew anyway. On the night of his second divorce, John Denver was nabbed for drunk driving. That was in '93. To see how he got there, go back. When John was working in Australia in 1986, he saw a singer named Cassandra Delaney perform on stage. She was 25 years old. He was 42. Within days, she was back with him in Aspen. In August 1988, they wed on a mountaintop above Aspen. In May of 1989, 9 months later, their daughter Jessie Bell was born, a child that everyone, including John, had been told he could never father biologically. That was a miracle. The marriage was not. In a 1995 interview, Cassandra described threats, jealousy, and heavy drinking. John told me I'd have nothing left, she said. They separated in 1991 and divorced in 1993. The custody battle has reportedly cost more than $3 million in legal fees. Cassandra was granted primary custody of Jessie Bell. John, meanwhile, wrote that Cassandra made a fool of me from one end of the valley to the other. Both they owned. Miserable. They were. In August 1994, still on probation from the first DUI, he wrecked his Porsche into a tree in Aspen. He was charged again. In October 1995, the Federal Aviation Administration told him to give up booze if he wanted to keep flying. In 1996, the FAA found he had not abstained and revoked his medical certificate. Revocation for violation order. But he flew along. 15 days prior to the accident. On September 27, 1997, John Denver bought a plane. No plane. A Roughton Long, an experimental amateur-built aircraft built from a kit by someone else, completed in 1987, adapted along the way. N555J tail number. He got it from a vet in the neighborhood. 8 days later, on October 5th, 1997, John performed at Selena Auditorium in Corpus Christi, Texas. The audience was told they could not film for more than 20 seconds. One radio staffer broke the rule and got most of the first 2 songs before security threw him out. That footage is the only video footage of John Denver's final performance. He acted boy from the country. He played Amazon. Witnesses said he appeared to be at peace. That was the last complete bull concert of his life. He was 53. He had just finished recording a children's album for Sony Wonder called All Aboard the summer before. It would net him the one and only Grammy of his entire career that he would never learn. 9 October 12th, 1997. The crash that killed John Denver was a crash that didn't have to happen. The day before the crash, October 11th, 1997, John had only taken a half-hour orientation flight in his new long EZD, only 30 minutes. His total experience in that particular airplane was around half an hour. He and the mechanic had already diagnosed a problem the aircraft had. The long EZ designer had originally put the fuel selector valve between the pilot's legs. Rather, the builder of this particular aircraft had put it behind the pilot's left shoulder. To change tanks in flight, the pilot had to turn his whole body 90 degrees, take his hand off the controls, and reach back over his shoulder. The fuel gauges were also located behind the seat. The pilot couldn't see them flying. The mechanic had given John an inspection mirror for him to look at the levels. The day before the crash, John and the mechanic had tried to extend the valve handle with vice grip pliers. It didn't work. Even with his harness, he couldn't get to it. The mechanic told John exactly how much fuel was on board that morning of the 12th of October. Left tank less than a quarter full, about 3.1 gall, less than half in the right tank, roughly 3.25 gallons. The mechanic offered to put gas in the plane. John said no. "I don't need it," he said. "I'm only going to be in the air for about an hour." He departed Terry Peninsula Airport at 5:12 p.m. He did 3 touch-and-go landings, practice landings in which the wheels just barely touch, and the plane immediately takes off again. Each consumed more fuel. Then he went straight out over the Pacific Ocean to the west. A few minutes later, his right tank went DRRI. To switch over to the left tank, the one that had even less fuel in it, he would have had to twist 90 degrees in his seat. In turning to reach the valve, he likely pressed the rudder pedal with his right foot, the NTSB final report said. The long EZ is very sensitive on the stick. The plane yawed to the right and climbed. Witnesses on the shore said he was flying at between 350 and 500 feet above the water. They heard the sputter of the engine. The plane went into a spin and crashed into Terry Bay, about 150 yards offshore, at about 5:28 p.m., close enough that witnesses wondered if it was some kind of acrobatic maneuver. His last words to the tower were calm. Investigators said, "See what I mean? No distress signal." The transponder disappeared. They had tried to get him back. Nothing came in. Cause of death, multiple blunt force traumas. Toxicology negative. No drugs. No alcohol. He was not drunk. He was less than 600 feet from the same Pacific shore he'd been writing songs about all his life. Number 10. The Grammy he never heard his name called for. Colorado Governor Roy Romer ordered all flags to be flown at half-staff. A retired Air Force chaplain held the funeral on October 17, 1997, at Faith Presbyterian Church in Aurora, Colorado. The following day, a public celebration was held in the Beyer Benedict Music Tent in Aspen. There were thousands there. The tent was gone for the season, so the service was held in an open-air bowl, and under the sky he'd spent a lifetime writing songs about. His ashes were scattered in the Rockies. A few months later, the Grammy Awards awarded him Best Musical Album for Children for the Train album he had recorded in the summer before the crash. It was his only Grammy of his career. He got it when he was dead. In 2007, the Colorado Senate designated Rocky Mountain High as one of 2 official state songs. Denver was the first inductee of the Colorado Music Hall of Fame in 2011. Denver penned the song about a state he never set foot in, but Take Me Home Country Roads became one of 4 official state anthems in West Virginia in 2014. His first wife, Annie, contributed to the building of the John Denver Sanctuary on the Roaring Fork River in Aspen. Lyrics of his songs were chiseled on native boulders. The lichen on the rocks has crept into the words themselves. Over the years, slowly making the songs feel as alive as the trees around them. 33 million plus units estimated total record sales, 12 gold albums, 4 platinum, approximately 300 recorded songs, about 200 of them written by John himself. Snowmass has a ski run called Rocky Mountain High. There is a plaque on top of it. It's the kind of memorial John would have really liked. Not a statue, not a wall in a museum, a run in a mountain. The same kind of mountain where he wrote the most loved song of his life in about 10 minutes on a chairlift. Looking up at Colorado's sky that, in his words, was a blue you can only see from up there. This is the part of the story that almost nobody tells. Right. John Denver was not the smiling denim-jacketed children's album Troubadour the parodies made him. His father was a world speed record holder who couldn't say I love you. A man who chose a stage name to replace the name his father made famous. A man who wrote a love song in 10 minutes or so, then a few years later took a chainsaw to the bed where he'd once had the woman he wrote it for. A man who passed every test NASA could throw at him to be the first civilian in space and was saved from the Challenger because a public announcement came from the White House. He sang about flying because that was the only thing he and his father ever really finished talking about. And in the end, the same passion that had finally given him a real relationship with his father. The cockpit, the sky, the open ocean off Pacific Grove is what killed him. The plane was purchased 15 days before the crash. The fuel valve was in wrong place. "Put gas in it?" said the mechanic. "No," he said. His fuel was low, less than an hour, and he turned west into a sunset from which he never came back. The same sky he'd written a love song into in about 10 minutes on a chairlift in Aspen. Did this story hit you? Destroy the like button. Comment below with the first John Denver song you loved. Annie's Song, Country Roads, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Rocky Mountain High. We read everyone. And subscribe, because the next legend we cover has an even harder question to answer in its last flight than this one. Until then, keep the music alive.